Well, thanks very much, Bill. Really appreciate you taking the time. So, could you just start off by stating your name and the community where you live?
Uh, Bill Bradley. I currently live in Cottage Grove, Oregon.
And you lived in Springfield for quite a few years before that, right?
Yeah, I just moved, so I lived in Springfield for 11 years.
Yeah.
Definitely, that was the time in my life where I definitely became an adult.
And can you just tell us where you were born and in what year?
I was born in Rockford, Illinois in 1986.
Okay, great. And tell us, what is the job that where you're currently employed, and how long have you been employed there?
Well, I currently am employed at Lane Transit District. My classification there is a tire specialist. And I've been there since 2009, so that's 13 and a half years now.
Great. And how did you get into this line of work?
Well, it was actually back in Illinois. I started working at a warehouse club, and I wanted to get to a position that had a little less customer contact. So they had a tire department, and it was a good place to go and make a little bit more money than a cashier, and learn a skill and be around a good bunch of guys.
Hmm. Yeah. So can you talk about exactly just what it is that you do in your job? I mean, just if you could just actually describe the work itself.
Yeah, so at Lane Transit District, the tire specialist manages the entire fleet, from ordering the tires to installing the tires, balancing the tires, rectifying tire repairs, coordinating the tire contracts, and engaging with fleet management, transit operations management if we're finding any consistent defects or faults, that we can kind of work on a training or infrastructure issues, to try to make sure that we're using the tires to the max we can and efficient use of the public dollar.
Mm-hmm. And just if you had any particular like special types of training in terms of doing your job, classes, courses, has it been on the job, or just how have you learned what you need to know to do your job effectively?
So yeah, I definitely took trainings, Michelin certified trainings. So Michelin being the big tire manufacturer, they have some courses you can take, and that starts with passenger tires to forklift tires to mining tires, and now transit tires for me. So that teaches you basically the construction of them, teaches you how to repair them effectively, the limits of repairs, how to do them safely, really trying to do good judgment. And then it's also on the job training and experience as you come across problems. um, we had a lot of aftermarket training from various equipment manufacturers that have the equipment that we use, so trying to understand the nuances of balancing, make sure that when we put a tire on a vehicle, it's not going to come back for a ride complaint. We do our best to make sure everything's smooth sailing after we touch it. Our whole goal is once we put a tire on, we don't want to see it again until we call it back in. We don't want it to roll back in for some other reason that was within our control. So always try to do the best job we can when we have it in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm just curious because I mean, I just know tires from, say, my own car or that sort of thing. And I mean, how does it differ dealing with tires when you're dealing, I guess, with they're much larger, of course, and there's lots of, I imagine you're dealing with weather issues, maybe more than the normal wear and tear. I just, how does a tire actually hold up under these types of circumstances in the type of use that they're being put to?
Uh, these transit tires are surprisingly durable. Uh, the abuse they take not only from a tread standpoint, but a sidewall standpoint, where they're rubbing against curbs constantly. Because as transit vehicle operators, we want to make it as easy for the customer to get on and off the bus as possible. Sometimes that involves being extra close to the curbs, which is understandable, but the tires are designed to take that. And that's another part of the tire we have to monitor that you wouldn't really monitor in a different scenario. So the sidewalls actually have depth gauges on them for how much rubber is being worn away.
Hmm.
You got to make sure you're continually walking the fleet to ensure that all the sidewalls have enough rubber on them to make it through the day. And usually you don't want just a day cushion, but you don't want to see any steel belts or anything on the sidewall. So they're definitely designed for that. They're designed for multiple uses, multiple lives. So there's an original life of a tire, and then you can retread them and get two more lives generally out of a casing. And that's a kind of a recycling that happens when you're reusing a transit bus casing. You're saving 15 to 20 gallons of oil every time you retread it, just because you don't have to create a new tire casing. So you get three lives out of one tire casing. So black can be green. If we're just retreading tires, that's good for our economy here because they're done locally, and it's actually good for the environment, which I think a lot of people don't actually understand.
Mm. And is the retreading then, is that something you send out to someone else to do, or do you do that, any of that in-house?
Yeah, we actually send that out to a local tire company
Mhm.
here in Eugene. I actually used to work for them, and actually did some work for them in the retreading plant too. So to see it all come full circle, I went from being a supplier
Mm.
and actually a manufacturer of retreaded tires to being the end user of them. So kind of know every part of the process, and always a good group of people to work with.
Yeah. But I imagine that must be really helpful to you that you've seen this process, as you say, from the first part of it, actually retreading a tire. I mean, really knowing that to being at the end that you work at now.
Yeah, I think it's something you got to kind of do to understand and kind of the limits of what's possible when you're evaluating the condition of a tire. What you can do with it? Can you retread it again? Can you repair it again, or is it time to retire it? And so I think having that is really good for really the end users, which are the bus operators and the customers, the riders, that when we're evaluating, the safety of the equipment we're using, that we have that full kind of 360 knowledge of its life.
So then just in terms of that piece of it, I was kind of wondering about quality control, inspection, all of that. Is there a process by which the drivers have to do checklists where you're communicating with them regularly? Or you actually doing inspections yourself? Just how does that process work?
Yeah, so we walk the fleet daily. So our fleet is not assigned to go out on the same route every single day. So they rotate the buses. So if you're walking the fleet daily, you'll see pretty much every bus within the week.
Mhm.
So you're really never getting too far away from me as the actual tire specialist.
Mhm.
But when an operator checks out a bus, they also have to do their own pre-trip inspection, safety inspection. So if they notice anything that perhaps is missed by a day or two because we didn't see that bus, they can bring it up and pull it over to the shop and have it rectified or take another bus. So yeah, they definitely do it. That's the job of an operator every time they take over a vehicle, is to do a pre-trip safety inspection.
Mhm. And just how many buses are in LTD's fleet?
It's 100 buses right now, from classic diesel buses to diesel hybrid buses that we've been running since 2006, or the new fleet of all electric buses.
And are the tires different then for each of those? I'm pardon my ignorance here. Are the tires different for each of those buses?
I mean, there's some innovation happening with tires on the electric buses to try to reduce the rolling resistance on them. I mean, that's always a game of compromises, because the more you reduce the rolling resistance to make them more efficient as a bus, you're probably sacrificing some grip or some durability.
Mm.
So they're always trying to find that balance. But really, what makes a tire, a transit tire, is actually the casing of it, the actual meat, the steel belt package and the bead package that goes around the wheel is more robust than you would find in a traditional, 18-wheeler kind of tire. They're
Mm.
definitely heavier duty, carry more weight for each tire. So they're about 120 psi's, but they're inflated to. And from a car, which is usually about 35, it's like a bit of an air bomb. You know, you got to make sure you're doing everything safely. So you inflate them in cages. When you're doing repairs, you try to repair them, let them set, inflate them in a cage, let them set, make sure that it's taking hold. Um, you know, you definitely have to watch yourself. I've been lucky enough never to have a tire explode on myself, and hopefully that's because of good judgment and
Yeah.
quality tires.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a question, Bill. I'm curious if there are any just particular skills or personal qualities you think are really needed to perform your job.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a judgment business for sure. You know, when you're looking at something, I'm the sole uh, tire specialist at LTD. So if I make a call, it has to be the right call. You know,
Mm,
actually, the fleet rides on my shoulders. That's how I always looked at it,
yeah.
because everything rides on the tires,
Mhm.
including, you know, our customers, our bus riders, and then, you know, motorists that travel around buses. So, you know, if the tires aren't working, nothing else on the bus works. So we have to have great judgment and making sure that every call we're making is on the side of safety. And sometimes those are hard calls, but you know, we got to make sure that we're putting out a quality product. And really, it's that and a strong back. I mean, it's a back breaking industry to be a tire specialist. No matter what, if you're doing cars or if you're doing uh, buses or mining equipment. I mean, it all requires you to have a pretty strong back and a durable body uh, to be able to last.
So would you say there are both physical and emotional stresses that you would associate with your work?
Yeah, I mean, definitely physical stress. I can't downplay that enough. I mean, you got to be performing at your best. If you're not using good form, if you're not, you know, having, you know, good, you know, musculoskeletal condition, then you could hurt yourself. And then that is a detriment to the fleet and a detriment to the quality of the product we're putting out if we're not having somebody there every day making those good calls. Also, you know, you're thinking you need to get these buses out in an efficient time, and sometimes there's factors outside of your control, and you got to be able to roll with that. And you know, sometimes that's putting in extra work in a day so you can get the bus out in time for the afternoon. um, it could also be uh, you know, the stress of trying to figure out a problem, because sometimes we have uh, you know, vexing issues that don't seem to have a perfect solution. So they become, you know, that process of elimination. We start here, we're, you know, trying to, you know, diagnose a problem and then find the solution. So it could be just a simple balance. It could be, you know, you got to true the tire up. You might have to change out a wheel. You might have to actually balance out the brake drums themselves, because those are actually really heavy and they spin just like the tire does. So if you're having a balancing problem that you can't fix on the tire, you might have to fix it within the brake drum. Um, it it just a process of elimination. Sometimes you just don't want to get too frustrated as you're going along.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just when you use the word diagnosis, that really resonated with me. It's almost like, you know, when you look at doctors, you like to think they always know the answers, and oftentimes they're doing a very similar type of thing, trying to rule things out, but the certainty takes a while to get to. Um, yeah, so I was curious then, you know, if you, it's kind of a two-part question, what you find most enjoyable or satisfying in your work, and on the other hand, what you find most challenging or maybe frustrating.
What I always enjoyed about the work was the independence of the job. I mean, as long as you're doing a good job, nobody's really asking you questions.
Mm-hmm.
Being a sole classification, it's a good feeling when things are working right, and people come to you for the answers and they trust what you're saying, and you get to work with a, you know, a good team that you're solving problems with. So we'll work hand in hand with the mechanics, and if we run into suspension issues or steering issues, you know, usually it'll be me that sees it first. That's just how it shows up in the tires or in the driver's complaints. Usually I get handed to me first, but we can kind of go to that next level of diagnosis. So it's working as a team there too, to solve the problems, and I've always enjoyed that. Challenging, you know, it was tough for periods of time when I was didn't have any backup at Lane Transit District. So there be mechanics that'd be interested in learning the field of tires. Not every mechanic is. So we would have a good backup solution when I go on vacation, and things would run smoothly. And then sometimes, we'd have retirements or people that become less willing to help out. And, you just really got to stack up all your spares and have extra sets mounted when you go on vacation. So when you come back, it's not a total mess. You left them some options.
Yeah.
And also, that becomes a tough one when you're trying to take care of your own health. If you have to call in sick, you already lined up 2 buses for the day. That means we had to down 2 buses for the day, and they held them back for me. But if you don't show up, then that kind of affects the whole fleet, because they had to hold these 2 buses, make decisions about other buses to send them out if they weren't fully repaired, if there was still some lingering issues, that they had to make those judgment calls as management.
Mhm.
So it definitely keeps the pressure on you to show up and be productive.
Yeah. Yeah. And just in terms of how you've talked a little bit about this. I'm just curious, any ways in the 12 or 13 years you've been at LTD, just how your work has changed or evolved over time in terms of anything about technology, any new skills you needed, the role of management, or just changes within the industry itself, just any ways in which that's evolved or changed based during your time on the job.
Yeah, when I came into lane transit, I was definitely the youngest guy by far in the fleet. I was 23, and my next closest peer on my shift was, late 40s. So, that management was very comfortable in their job. They had been working at the district for a long time. They knew the ins and outs of what needed to happen daily. They knew the rhythm, of what needed to happen. And I had to kind of get into that. But once I got into that, it was really good. And as that kind of silver tsunami happened, and there was a lot of turnover as my tenure has gone up. We're getting replacement folks that didn't actually come through the ranks, didn't come through the transit industry. They're coming from outside. Whether it's from military background, or it could be from just a completely non-maintenance related background, and they're becoming maintenance managers and directors to translate what they think they know about it to what actually needs to be done. That has been challenging. It's been difficult to train your boss, especially when you don't even speak the same language. So those have been stressors for the workforce, me in general, and as a tire specialist and as a union officer. I would say it's been a different challenge.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue to the next question I wanted to ask you. Was I know that you're active in your union, Amalgamated Transit Union Local 757. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you came involved in the union and what it means for you having a union at your workplace.
Yeah, having a union at the workplace, that was new for me. Before I started at LTD, I'd never been in a union before. Actually, when I was recruited for the job, I was very hesitant. I was like, I don't know about that union stuff. My father was in the union as a machinist, and I heard some stories of how hardcore it can get, strike lockouts, things like that. So I actually had a visit with the previous union rep at LTD and kind of explained to me this scenario, this union stuff, and he did a really good job of telling me how a union's an advocate and a supporter, and here to make sure that we have safe working conditions and solve problems. They're problem solvers, not problem makers. That's how he saw them, and that's how I want to see them. So that was a really good introduction to kind of change my view on it. As as a kid, I remember growing up, and my dad was a machinist, and then he went to be actually management at his company, and that transition was pretty tough. We had bricks thrown through our windows and stuff. It was different times. The 80s were a different time, but so there was that hesitancy, but I think he really kind of squashed it. And so I started working there, and I was there for about 18 months, and we were running into some hard contract negotiations with LTD at the time, It was during the Great Recession still. Uh, and they were running into an issue on retirement. And I was talking to the previous union rep for maintenance, and I was like, hey, they, what are you guys asking for? I wanted to know specifically. And so I costed it out just doing some math and looked at the budget and see what could be possible. And I wrote up a document. I said, I think you could sell this. You could sell this because, they have this pot of money here. We're asking for this much. It seems to be a sustainable level that you're asking for. See if you can get it, see if we can kind of sweeten it a little bit, give a small win, because the recession was hard to find wins, but it was really to boost retirement savings for our workers. And we had pension, but we had no way of actually incentivizing people's personal retirement savings. So get that third leg of the stool.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the goal. So I gave them the sheet, gave them the write-up, and went to the next bargaining session. I was able to convince the general manager in the parking lot that it was doable. And they got the agreement, and that part was part of the agreement. And I got to see, wow, that made a difference.
Yeah.
That was an amazing feeling. I was like, oh, look at that. It's in the contract. I pretty much created that.
Yeah.
That was cool. So when the previous fleet officer was going to hang it up, and he kind of wanted to take a step back before he retired, he just asked me to step up in the next round of elections. And I had actually made my 2-year window, which was our requirement for running for union office. And so it worked out, and I ran for the fleet union officer and was elected to that twice before being elected to the district-wide officer twice now. So now I represent all the workers, not just fleet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just curious, of course, I know LTD, I guess you started there a little bit past the strike. What was it, 05, I think? I'm trying to remember, gosh.
Yeah.
But I gather there's been at least a number of managers there over at least the 20 years I've been around. I forget exactly how many, but I guess it's maybe a broader question is just public transit in terms of just how it's faring, no pun intended, how is it faring? And then the other question is maybe what is it that the public doesn't know about public transit in general or LTD in particular that you think that you would like them to know?
I mean, there's certainly a few directors at LTD that have been around since the strike era. And as a lover of history, I did my best to learn everything about ATU and LTD going back to 1971 when we organized. You have to understand how the collective agreement came together and how these provisions were put in there. If you're ever going to articulate, in a grievance process, the history and how this language actually should be interpreted. So I definitely did my deep dives into the past and try to take all their knowledge because, unfortunately, our past leaders don't stay with us forever. So try to get as much as we can when we can. So 2005 was definitely a big part of the membership when I came in, remembering the strike, how that galvanized folks around healthcare and the fight to keep good healthcare at LTD. And proud to say, in 2022, we're largely doing the same healthcare plan with some improvements actually that we implemented in 2005 as a result of that strike. So, that has kind of been a top tier issue every time we go to bargaining. So that 2000 strike still reverberates within our thinking every day when it comes to protecting and preserving our healthcare benefits as transit workers, which unfortunately, I don't think people understand the toll that the work of transit actually takes on a person's body, not just from maintenance, which is a physical, toll, but, in operations, when you're a bus driver, yeah, it's a physical toll sitting in all day with those vibrations going through your body up and down 8 hours, 10 hours a day. But your shifts can be so varied. You can start early in the morning, get split in the middle of the day, and then you have to come back in the evening. So your span could be 14 hours in the day, but really only making 8 hours pay. And that's really tough. Some bus operators have their schedule. They only know it the night before in the evening for what they're going to do tomorrow. So you can't really be a reliable partner, can't be a reliable parent, you can't really make commitments to your family until you can get enough seniority to get on a scheduled run. Uh, and that's tough. And the district has, what I would say has been chronically understaffed for many years, that they rely on mandatory overtime to continue to run the system.
Mhm.
And that makes you even less of a reliable partner or parent. And that takes a huge psychological toll on the members, because they have to deal with the stress at home of not being there, not
Yeah.
being able to do the chore that needs to be done, not going to the soccer game to bond with your kids. uh, so that part is tough, and that's things within our control. And then there's things outside of our control, like the riding public. And you know by and large, the public is great when they're on the buses. They appreciate the service, and it's vital to their success in our community. But there's certainly aspects where we run into some more volatile members of our community that for whatever reason want to take out their anger and frustrations on the frontline worker, that's the transit operator. And we're not necessarily social workers by training, but if you're in this job for long enough, you're going to have to learn some skills,
Mm.
how to navigate people's behaviors, how to be able to de-escalate situations, how to access the right resources for what you're seeing. Not everything requires a uniformed response, but you want to get people to where they need to go. That's important, but also get them there safely, for them and for the other riders. So kind of taking some of that verbal abuse, and sometimes that's supposed to physical abuse. That's something that is really only now becoming told in the public sphere, but it's something the union's been highlighting for at least the past decade. The rise in kind of emotional and physical violence on transit operators.
And I guess, yeah, and I would imagine that perhaps accentuated during the pandemic.
It did, and it was stressful for everyone. We were asking our bus operators not only to keep moving the community like we always have, and let people make the connections they need to make, whether it's grocery shopping, going to the store, going to their jobs, seeing their family, but they also had to become public health advisors and enforcing masks, and enforcing social distancing, and having those conflicts come up with marginal protections. We did the best we could, have people board through the rear, try to enforce the masks, for the health and safety of all the riders that were on board. But that became its own issue that we saw in nearly every frontline position, from flight attendants to the retail clerk, trying to keep people safe from the best health advice we had. But really, it fell on the lowest, frontline person in any company to do that. And that's just not really what they signed up to do. They signed up to drive people around, make people's day. And that really escalated some of the verbal attacks. And unfortunately, spitting
Mm.
became a weapon of choice
Oh, God.
in some of these uh, discussions. And that's one of the most degrading things that can happen to anybody, is to be spat on,
Yeah.
especially during a pandemic. And we haven't, it hasn't been the largest of problems in Eugene. It's been more so recently, but we don't need it to continue to climb. We need to find a way to rectify that. So that's not needs to it doesn't need to be the focus of everything. I mean, I think the overall impact of transit is positive,
Mhm.
and I think as a district, LTD could probably do a better job of telling the story
Mm.
of how this service is vital
Yeah.
to a senior that wants to age in place, to a student that wants to get to school,
Mm.
to an up and coming worker who wants to get their first job. That's what it was for me. I got my first job in Eugene riding LTD to it. It
Mm,
was my connection to my first job in Eugene. And that job led me to get a job at LTD.
yeah,
So without the bus, I can't be working at the bus.
yeah,
And we need to find a better way to explain that to the public of what this really does for our communities. Because that job at LTD really was my ticket to becoming a real um, productive member of the community, being able to be a homeowner and raise a family.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's very clear you take an enormous amount of pride in your work.
For sure. I think it drives me every day to see an impact. That impact could be, helping a member out, with a benefit question. It could be seeing a member be proud that they helped somebody from point A to point B,
Mm,
helped them from one station bay to another station bay if they didn't know where to go and navigate the system. Um, just knowing that every day there's a positive impact that's being made by the transit district, and being a part of that, I think, is something we need to kind of highlight a little bit more.
yeah, like you say, there's just so much more, and yeah, people are getting transported from one place to another, but there's so many multiple meanings and implications of that that really make the community, people's lives better, and really are essential infrastructure, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, we're considered an essential public service, like police, fire, and it really is. If you take away people's ability to move around the community, they can't succeed. And if you have to impose the tax of owning an automobile on everybody's success, then that's just not going to work. Not everybody's going to have the opportunity,
Yeah.
but that's what public transit does. It helps, level it out. People ride for various reasons, but um, it's good that it's an option there for people that are starting out that don't have um, that ability to upfront pay for an automobile.
Yeah, and it also just seems moving forward with climate change into the future that, well, hopefully more resources go into public transit and alternative forms of transportation for that reason as well.
Yeah, I think with the most recent administration from the Biden administration, the investment from transit is huge. They're investing in the bipartisan infrastructure bill over $100 billion in public transit over the next 5 years, and that really juiced up a lot of the federal funding that's going to a lot of the agencies. That's going to make a generational impact, from cleaning up our buses to all electric buses to increasing our service frequency, our span of service in a day, the coverage that we can do. Uh, we can really be the viable alternative if we get our act together,
Mm.
and we have no excuse.
Mhm. Yeah. So you feel with the new legislation that there really is at least a level of support for public transit that at least approaches the level of need?
It meets the level of need, kind of a minimum need. But if we can get uh, more, state and local funding to kind of invest in these areas, there's programs out there that have never been able to get fully implemented due to the pandemic. So the state of Oregon did step up to the plate and develop some more transit funding right before the pandemic, but it never got a chance to take off, and LTD never got a chance to invest that money into the community of increased service or coverage. Um, so hopefully, as we come out of the pandemic and people, reevaluate how we put that service out there, um, that we can actually make it better for folks who want to make that choice, whether it's for climate change, for saving money by not owning a vehicle. If it's designing our communities around frequent transit networks, one bus moving 40 people is a lot less space than 40 cars going down the road.
Mm.
So, how we think about moving people, I think is going to be an important community conversation. And I think we can be up to the challenge.
Yeah, yeah, great. Well, those you really addressed my questions and then some. I just wanted to ask you, Bill, if there was anything else you wanted to share that we haven't covered, or just any final types of reflections or observations about your work and what it's meant to you.
Yeah, I just highlight, what, being a union member and a union officer meant for me. I mean, going in and working at Lane Transit District, having a union contract that I could look through, having, wages I can look at, helped me get my first house in the middle of a recession, having a job for less than a year. I was able to take that union contract to a lender and say, hey, this is my security. This is where my wages are going. This is, give me a loan.
Yeah.
The housing market had crashed, and they were being a little stingy with loans, but I had a union contract. My wife had a union contract
Oh, wow.
because she had recently got a job at the state of Oregon. So
Mhm.
we took those in. We said we want a loan,
Yeah.
and we bought a house in Springfield, out in Thurston, and really put down roots in the community because of that security that we were able to have with the union contract, and that just really helped our path forward. Owned that house for 11 years. It was a great neighborhood. It was a great place to start out. With a family. Had our son there. Really without that stability, that security, I couldn't have made that argument with a lender
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
I was a bet worth taking.
Yeah.
I only had held a job for less than a year at the time. And, lenders are usually pretty risk averse anyway, but in the middle of a recession,
Yeah.
there certainly are.
Yeah.
So that was something that I think has, been super impactful in my life. And I don't think it's really discussed a lot of what having a union job really means when you go out there and you talk about putting down roots and making investments in yourself, but also the community by becoming a stable homeowner. Um, that's just, I was a property taxpayer then, and I really got to contribute back to
Mhm.
Springfield, and I think
Yeah.
Springfield's definitely where I grew up and where I became, uh, a, a really, functioning member of our community. Like, was able to, get involved and get involved in the schools and be a parent and a father, and enjoy everything that Springfield had
Yeah.
to offer, and see the revitalization of Main Street and watch downtown blossom during my time there. Uh, it was definitely because getting that job and having that ATU contract was huge.
Yeah, I think the idea of a union job, you just so encapsulated the multiple meanings of that. It's beyond what, it's certainly important what it gives you at the workplace itself, but even beyond, it's sort of like you throw that pebble in the water, union job, and the ripples just go, in a lot of different and virtuous directions.
Yeah, and that's become a pivotal point of mine when I'm talking to new members, is starting out and investing in a home, stop investing in rent, and how do we, build people's personal savings and retirement savings up. I want folks to have a stable financial future, and that's what really kind of informs me every day, is, you know, this provided that opportunity for me. I want to make sure it continues to provide that opportunity for people that come after me. Um, that's having jobs that our members can continue to work and live in the community that they work in.
Mhm.
I think is number one priority, and that should be for most any union, uh, to be able to live in the community you work in.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. I know there's unfortunately a number of jobs where people can't afford that, and that certainly seems like an entirely, worthy goal. Well, Bill, I just want to really thank you so much for taking time to speak to me, and this is a real worthy addition to the stories that we are going to be telling with this project.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for the chance to talk and kind of share my story. I appreciated the time.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop the recording. Let's see. Stop this real quick.